All right, it is summertime. I haven't been on the mic talking to people and interviewing people at Rhythm Changes in quite some time, long enough that there were cobwebs on my SM58 when I picked it up here. But we have a very special occasion to get back into that. One of the things that's happened over the summer is that we launched a Calgary gig list at Rhythm Changes. It's curated by my old friend from my CapU days, David Lavoie, who is a Calgary native and has been based there for a long time, making all kinds of cool music. And today, I am delighted to talk to somebody else who has made a lot of really cool music out of Calgary for the last 20 or so years that he has run Bug Incision. And through his work there and work under his own name and with other people, he's a composer, producer, multi-instrumentalist, curator, and presenter. I would say he plays drums, he plays other things. He has put out a lot of music and put on a lot of shows featuring people that I really want to learn more about. And so I thought I would start today by talking to him about what he's been up to both now and in past years. So, Chris Dadge, it's awesome to have you here at Rhythm Changes. It's nice to meet you.
Likewise, thanks so much for having me. I'm pleased to have a chance to chat.
It's great timing because you just did another installment of Bug Incision on July 19th, and you had it at a media gallery that is probably one of your recurring spaces in Calgary. And I'd love to just hear a little bit about how that went and what you got up to at this thing on the 19th.
Yeah, so that was a really great show. Media is a video production society. They're an artist-run center who does video work. And there's a guy there who works there named Joe Kelly, and he comes to Bug Incision shows on a regular basis, and I've known him for many years. And he proposed that there was some city funding available to put on one-off events, and he proposed a collaboration between Media and Bug Incision, which was fitting because our second main venue that we worked out of, this would have been back in 2007, 8, 9, 10, was Media. They had a different location on 4th Street in Calgary. They're now sort of in the west end of downtown, where there's a whole cluster of artist-run centers over there. So he produced, he presented this idea that we get a couple of video artists who can improvise live in real time and get some musicians. And that was what we did. We had 4 musicians. I played in a duo with Jonathan Wilkie, who is the other half of the operational side of Bug Incision. We've been playing together since 2006, the beginning of the series, really, and even before that. They are an amazing saxophone player who lived in Vancouver for quite a few years, leading up to 2012, when they relocated here. And so we played a duo. It was great. A young musician who is sort of newer to the series, named Se-Young Lee, played a modular synth set. The legendary Chad Van Galen played a deranged set of home-built electronic devices, and I've never seen him rock out as hard as he did on that set. He was headbanging. He was having a great time. I think he was largely just happy that all his gear worked, which is not always the case. And then a great drummer from Toronto, an Italian drummer who's based in Toronto at the moment. His name was Andrea Scala, and he played a great set of solo drums with electronic backing, and the video artists were great. Joe Kelly did a little work, and yeah, it's sort of we are in the 20th year of the series, which felt like something worth celebrating. We did a lot of activity around the 10th anniversary. And this year we'd applied for some funding to do some stuff, but it didn't come through for us. And this show somehow just really felt like actually maybe this was the 20th anniversary show, unintentionally. There were a lot of connective threads with the history of the series, with the space and the musicians who were involved, and sort of the lineup kind of represented a nice overview of what we do, and the types of things that we like to do. So it was great. It was a really awesome show. It was packed. Everyone had a great time. There were free sandwiches from a delicious Italian market, and yeah, good times were had. It was really nice.
Yeah, I'm really happy to hear that. Before we go back into the recent presenting history of Bug Incision and some of the other places, I wanted to catch you on something else that happened recently and ask you how it was, which was the Calgary Folk Music Festival, which I had some designs to come out and attend parts of, but didn't quite work this year. But you were telling me as we got set that you played with a couple of different people. So how was your Calgary Folk Fest?
Oh, it was good. It was it's really warm in Calgary right now, so it was a sweaty one. But I played in 3 bands this year, which is unusual. I don't normally the folk fest is like a kind of a one band thing if I'm playing it at all. Which is not always, not every year I get to play, but the local component of the programming is fairly minimal. They're trying to bring in exciting people that you don't get to see on a regular basis. So yeah, there just happened to be 3 bands. I played with Hermitess, is a group led by a person named Jennifer Crichton, who plays the harp and sort of writes these self-described witchy sort of folky tunes that feature the harp and a hammered dulcimer and a hurdy-gurdy. And David Lavoie was playing bass in that band. He is doing a great job. He played some trumpet too, actually, lucky for us. And yeah, so that was great. I played with that band regularly, so that wasn't anything out of the ordinary necessarily. And then there was a singer named LT Leaf, who is Calgarian but is living in Scotland currently. And they were here to play, and it was great because we haven't played together in 10 years, and we were good friends when they lived here, and it was great to reconnect and play that music as well. They play the ukulele and write these sort of deceptively confusing songs that are really great, and they have a great voice, and the band was nice. And then the third band was called Rally, and Rally is led by Clea Anais and Brock Geiger, both of whom I've worked with quite a bit. Brock in particular is we play together in 4 bands, and I play in his solo project, and we do all sorts of stuff together. Actually 5 bands now that I'm thinking about it. We have an improvised music group as well. And so, yeah, it was a lot of work, a lot of shows. Each band had their own concerts, as well as you may be familiar with the workshop thing that happens at Canadian Folk Fest. I think it's kind of unique to Canada. Most Americans who come up here are sort of mystified by it, which is always kind of funny. But so, yeah, there were workshops. Oh, and I should say that those 3 bands that I played with about 20 years ago, the 3 lead singers of each band also had a band called the Consonant C. And so one of the workshops functioned as a sort of impromptu reunion for this band, who was around when I was first getting going and was kind of prominent in the city for a while. They did a lot of event organizing and stuff too. They were very cool people. So yeah, there were 8 performances from Friday evening to Sunday afternoon, and yeah, I've earned my day off, I think. But it was great. It's always awesome. Tons of friends. It's hard to walk 10 feet without bumping into someone you know, and you get ripped around on golf carts and nice treatment, and yeah, no complaints. It was a great one.
That's funny that you mentioned the thing about workshops at Folk Fest being uniquely Canadian, because I don't know if I would have clocked that, because before COVID, I spent a good 3, 4, 5 years kind of playing in the Canadian folk festival circuit, with first a band that started as instrumental, but then evolved into like a folk rock band. And we played at a lot of the folk festivals, but we never really played in the US, so I didn't get to see the other side.
Yeah, for me, it's not. I haven't really played any folk fest in the US either. It's normally just when you meet Americans who are here, they're like, "What is this? You know, what is this thing that we have to do?" And you know, some people really don't like the workshop stages. I struggled with them more when I was younger. Now I'm more just into playing and helping things sound good. But you always get a couple crusty people who don't quite want to get in on the action, and we had a few of those over the weekend, but it was mostly very good, and mostly warm, fun times.
Yeah, the combinations of people, you don't know what kind of chemistry you're gonna get.
Yeah, if any at all. Sometimes there's no chemistry. So yeah, other times it's been brilliant. I remember there was one time that I was playing with a guy named Jay Crocker, who now does a project called Joyful Talk. He's on Constellation Records out there in Montreal. He lives in Sackville now, but yeah, it was me. I was playing in his band, weird avant-garde pop stuff. Chad Van Galen was playing with his band. There's a sort of surf rock band called the Rambling Ambassadors, kind of instrumental music that were from here. And then that band, the Akron Family, I don't know if you remember them. They were really cool, kind of psychedelic folk, indie folk stuff. They had a record that Hammond Drake set in on. It was the four of us, and that one was probably the best one I ever got to be a part of. But yeah, you never know how they're going to go.
You've mentioned Chad Van Galen a couple times. It just so happens within the last 24 hours, I saw that he announced a tour and there's a Vancouver show.
Yeah, he's doing a little solo rip in the West Coast. We're playing Pop Montreal in September as a band, and then he hasn't been on the road, he hasn't toured, I mean, God, since 2022 was the last time we went to Europe. And yeah, Canadian tour, it's been ages. So I think he's got a new booking agent that he's stoked about, and yeah, hopefully this will be the start of lots more live Chad.
Yeah. All right, so for live conversations, let's talk about more Bug Incision presentations. The main space over the last several years, I mean, pretty much monthly or so from my eyes going back to 2018 at least, is Highline Brewing, and lots of bills with lots of bands and what you call ad hoc ensembles, which I've noticed is kind of a concept that you and some of your colleagues around the national scene, I've seen that phrase used. So you have some of those, and then you have many bands that have come through Highline Brewing and other spaces. So can you talk about that space and the run of Bug Incision just in the recent years? I'd love to learn more about how that's been.
Yeah. So yeah, Highline's been great. They are a small brewery in Inglewood, neighborhood of Calgary. When I went in there for the first time, it sometimes, as a person who looks for venues and puts on shows, you have a different eye for a room, and you're like, "Ooh, what could happen here?" And so when I saw that room, I was like, "Oh, this is a nice small room that we could probably make this room feel pretty good." And it just so happened that my partner Sam was working. Samantha Savage Smith, she's also a musician and songwriter. She was working there at the time. The main brewer and co-owner there was a friend from the community, drummer who played in many great bands, this guy James Matheson. And he ended up getting married to Sam's best friend from high school. So it was all very close quarters, and having the inn with Sam working there, but also knowing James before, they were amenable to letting us take over Sunday nights once a month, and they would not normally be open on a Sunday night, so it was kind of not a huge, we're not going to ruin their normal Sunday atmosphere with our sometimes very strange music. And yeah, it was great. It was right off the bat. It was awesome, and we loved doing it. Over the course of the pandemic, they expanded their space to like 3 or 4 times the size of their original tiny room, and sort of had a stage in place. So now it's better for the shows. It's not, when it was packed before, it was really packed, and you couldn't really move around, and it was kind of a problem. So the bigger space is awesome, and has worked really well for us. And so yeah, I try to do a monthly series. Usually, sometimes January is off, sometimes June is off. June is just when Sled Island Festival happens in Calgary, and it's just personally is a very busy time for me, so I tend to try to avoid those months. But we did January this year, and it's sort of just depends. And sometimes there'll be 2 shows in a month if someone's traveling through. We do get a lot of touring artists coming through. So you were mentioning the 2 different styles of programming. Yes, indeed. There are sort of normal, traditionally billed shows where there'll be 3 or 4 groups or solos performing, and those are relatively straightforward. People play for 20 minutes to 40 minutes kind of thing, and that's one thing. And then, yeah, the ad hoc ensembles you mentioned, that word is one that I lifted from Derek Bailey, the esteemed, legendary British improvising guitarist who did a lot of he wrote a book about improvisation, which is pretty interesting. And he would do these things called company weeks, where once a year he would get a bunch of different people, like intentionally diverse, like almost like comically diverse groupings of 7, 8, 9 people. And over the course of 3 nights, they would just play in different formations. All of them would play. There would be some solos, duos. There's recordings of those festivals that you can get that are amazing. So I just outright stole that idea, as one does. And normally we sort of settled on 9 people in trios. That seems to be the most comfortable thing. A duo can be pretty intense. Sometimes, and for these shows in particular, there's not really... there's no requirements for what, if someone wants to play it at one of these shows, I will let them play at the show. Our website has a form that you can fill out that drops a bunch of information about what you do, and then I put that into a spreadsheet. And when it's time to book these things, I'll just go down the list and say, this person hasn't played yet, or this person hasn't played in a while. Or sometimes people reach out and they'll say, can I play on the next ad hoc night? And the answer is usually yes. I try not to have too much of any one instrument. That sort of gets a little bit dull, but a trio is nice. It's not too many people. And like I said, duos can be kind of imposing, especially for people who have never played together before. But yeah, so those are great. We do 3 sets, 3 trios per set, so everyone gets to play 3 times. And as the night progresses, people sort of get a handle on what everybody else is doing and what sort of things they can expect from that. So by the end of it, it's really usually cooking and people are feeling great. And those are quite popular nights because they bring out just a lot of different people. And I think the idea of the audience knowing what the situation is where these people haven't met, and I don't tell anybody who they're going to play with in advance. I just call out their names and they have to come on stage and play. So it's kind of fun. It's got sort of this baked in sort of format to it that is I think it's great. I think it works. People have a good time.
The phrase ad hoc ensembles, I'll tell you where else I saw it in your world potentially. A couple months ago, I was in an ensemble and we went over from Vancouver to Victoria and we played the series Tonight at the Orange Light, Shane Krause, and I saw that there was another edition of that series where they talked about ad hoc ensembles happening there.
Yeah, Shane's a good old friend of mine. We used to play together in a group called Rock Heights. It was the 2 of us. We toured around Canada, West Coast. And yeah, Shane's great. Finally made it back to Calgary. I think it was last year now already, but we got to reconnect a little bit. He's a great player. And yeah, we come from the same sort of lineage of knowing about the European improv scene and being sort of studied in that world. So I'm not surprised that he would also use a term like that. And I've heard good things about this series. They got lots of cool shows. And somebody I met recently had played there as well too. So yeah, I'm happy to see that they're doing that because yeah, the more the merrier. That's great. I like to hear that.
Another space where I saw you did Bug Incision live often in a prior chapter was Weeds Cafe.
Weeds was great. They were I went to Montreal at a certain point to do some playing, and there was a place there called the KGB. I'm pretty sure it's gone now, but it was like right in the cool Myland part of Montreal. And I think Marty Spaghetti was happening out there at the time, which was run by Josh Zubat and maybe just Josh, or maybe anyway, it was a cool series. And it was a sort of bar cafe in the front, and then in the back they just had this small back room, and that's where the shows took place. And then when I saw that, Weeds Cafe is close to where it's still around, and it's close to where I grew up and currently live still. And I was like, oh, this kind of reminds me of Weeds. I wonder if Weeds, and I knew that Weeds had all ages shows and sort of infrequent programming, but they would do stuff in their space. And so I thought maybe they would be down with having shows there, and they were for quite a few years. That was probably the most sort of modest era of Bug Incision, I would say. The shows were I guess they were pay what you can. I had this little camera case that I would always take pictures and videos on this little camera, and then we would pass the case around and people would put their money in the case. And sometimes, then we would just split it up at the end, but it was very informal. There was no like door where you pay to get in or anything like that. It was quite loose, and the room was just a room with a bunch of chairs and old couches in it, and it was great. It sounded cool in there. We had lots of cool people come through, actually, and I mean, like John Oswald played there with Scott Thompson and myself. Nick Kaloya and Laurie Friedman played back there. Jack Wright played there. That was kind of from about 2009 to 13-ish. And then the reason that we stopped doing stuff there was that the owners so there was another person who was doing an event there every so often that was more of like an open jam, almost like an open mic night for improv, but it just ended up being a bunch of people making a ton of noise in the back, and they didn't really have like an audience so much. So it was that show was more of a drain on the cafe than ours were, but the owner got sort of confused about who was who, and I think didn't want to have us do shows there anymore. So that was the end of that. But we did occasionally do the odd show there over the years after we sort of moved away from there. There was a bit of a wilderness era in the like 2014, 15. You'll notice on the show that there's on the website that there were a lot less shows during that those couple of years. But around 2012, we did get there was, I don't know if you know about this thing in Canada where there's every so often, I'm not sure if it's yearly or what, but it's called some city gets named the cultural capital of Canada for that year, and a bunch of money flows into the city to do to fund grants for different people. So I applied for a grant in 2012 to get I was just throwing, and actually, funnily enough, this grant was partially run by Jen Crichton from Hermitage, who I mentioned earlier. I didn't know her as well at the time, but that's a fun little fact. But so yeah, we got all this money to fly in a bunch of people that we had worked with as on the Bug Incision label, because the Bug Incision originally started as a record label 1 year before in 2005. So we just got a bunch of people that we loved we'd put out records for, and they came in. They would do workshops in the basement of a record store, and a lot of the shows happened at Weeds or the National Music Center, which at the time might have been called Cantos still, before the National Music Center changed their name. But so that was the Weeds era, though. Yeah, right around then.
Before keep working our way backwards and talk about Bug Incision as a label, and by that avenue probably also some of those 2000s years, I wanted to catch something that I guess happened in between the two chapters that we just talked about that I saw on YouTube, because you upload a bunch of videos from this 2021 event that you got to do in a larger space.
Oh, yeah. Yeah. So that was at the Grand, which is a building downtown, a really old historic building downtown that got restored by a theater company called Theater Junction. And Theater Junction was, so there's a guy named Peter Moeller, and Peter is low-key legend of music in Calgary. He played in a band called the Ripcords in the 80s that were kind of like a cool indie band in the 80s. He also is an improviser who made a record that, I don't know if you know about this label called Onari. It's a label from the 70s that was run by Bill Smith, who also ran Coda magazine, and also the Sackville label. And so this Onari was like the free improv label, though. And there's only 6 titles came out on the label, and it's awesome. You should definitely check it out. They're kind of easy to find sometimes in record stores if you keep your eyes peeled in used places. Some really great stuff. And he put out a record on Onari with a guitarist named Randy Hutton, and they were clearly coming from like the sort of Hand Benink, slightly like wacky improv, but it was really good. So anyway, he was always sort of, he knew about Bug Incision and he wanted to help us. So he actually put us in touch with Cantos originally, and then he also got us hooked up with Theater Junction at the Grand, because he was the resident composer for Theater Junction at the time. Funnily enough, I became the composer sometime after him, partially through this thing. But he got us access to this upstairs room, which was more of a rehearsal studio, but it's a really cool room, super high ceilings, kind of like a black box theater type of place, but instead of black walls, it was this cool brick wall. It was part of the original structure of the very old building. And yeah, so those videos you're referring to, we did those shows after our first venue. We split it between Theater Junction Grand Rehearsal Studio and Media and Cantos. We were moving around quite a bit, but yeah, so those shows were great. We did them for a couple of years there, and in the pandemic 2021, there was you could apply to use the space for something, and I just thought it would be cool to well, we couldn't do shows, so it would be cool to do a series of videos. So we got the artists. They were all down to do it, and then my friend Marlena Moore, who is a songwriter and singer and great person who lives in Montreal, she did the camera work, which I just wanted to sort of be like a roving eye, and so the camera work is just an unbroken roving take of the performance. And then my friend Scott Monroe, who actually started Bug Incision with me, did help me with the audio, and he was also in a couple of the videos you'll notice. And yeah, they turned out really great. I thought I was very happy with them. It was interesting to learn how to sync audio to video, also quite maddening at times because I have no idea what I'm doing, but I sort of just like decided to do that, and it eventually worked out. But doing the titles, all that was really fun, new thing for me to do in the heart of the pandemic. So yeah, those were great. And that's the Theater Junction Grand building. They still do stuff, and we've done shows in other parts of that building too. They have a even smaller room where we did just a handful of shows. Tetsuya Nakatani played in there. Joe Morris played in there. And it was also very cool. But it was just, that building is like, it's a big building, and there's lots of, to get access to it is a little bit trickier and more specific. So we haven't done anything there in a while, but wouldn't turn down the opportunity again.
Yeah, and people can watch that and check it out. Let's talk now about the formation of Bug Incision as a label. You've been alluding to it a little bit. There's your ensemble, Bent Spoon, that evolved into a certain format and started to provide some of the earliest Bug Incision releases. And you wrote about all this, actually published on the website, 28-page little PDF, which you might have printed as well, but I read it digitally. Yeah. Free music in Calgary reflections on Bug Incision at 10 years. So that is to say in 2016 when you wrote it. But let's hear about the early days and the formation then.
Yeah, so yeah, the Bent Spoon, originally we started out as the Bent Spoon Ensemble, and that was myself, Scott Monroe, who now he's widely known for a number of things. He lives in Montreal now, but he's got a band called Preoccupations, and he records lots of rock bands, and he's an amazing musician. We went to college together, music school, and so we were tight and continue to be really close. He played bass in this band, double bass, and then we had a sax player, a high school friend of mine named David Lang, who I went on to later have a band called Lab Coast with, that was around for basically 2010 to 2020. We did a lot of activity there. And then there was a fourth person named, at the time his name was Kevin Lee, and now John Long Lee, a poet, quite a esteemed poet in Calgary. After many years of living in Europe and other places, he's back in town. And we recorded a record. My friend Laurie Matheson, the great producer and songwriter from Calgary, he this was his one of the first records he ever recorded. So this was the start of his sort of trajectory into being like a really busy recording engineer. He recorded our album. We were an improvising group, not necessarily free jazz, I wouldn't say. We were kind of going for something else, something more like Can or Tortoise, maybe. We liked that Chicago jazz from the late 90s and early 2000s. He recorded our album and he put it out on his label, which was called Western Famine. And back then it was pretty common. This was 2003. And so it was very common to just only be able to get 500 units of a CD pressing, which we quickly found out was a ridiculous amount of CDs for us to be making. Kevin left the band about a year later, and we became the Bent Spoon Trio. And when we became the Bent Spoon Trio, we sounded completely different. We had all sort of got more into European free jazz and free improv. People like Evan Parker, Derek Bailey, Paul Litton, Tony Oxley, Barry Guy, all those types of people, the Spontaneous Music Ensemble, all that stuff. And so we immediately sounded different from our first show. And we sort of thought, well, okay, now we have these 500 CDs that don't represent what we sound like anymore. And we sort of realized this was going to keep happening, that we were going to keep changing and evolving. And so we thought when we wanted to make a new record, well, A, we didn't have any money to go to a studio, and B, I had some mics and a digital Porter studio. And so we recorded it. And then when it came time to think about putting it out, there was, at the time, this is about 2005 or so, there were a lot of CDR labels out there at the time, and they were amazing. They were cheap. It was back then, shipping was reasonable. You could afford to pay for shipping on things from the States and Europe. And we just got a lot of inspiration. There was one label in particular called Quake Basket, which was run by this guy, Tim Barnes, out of New York. And we loved, he actually didn't make CDRs, but the packaging was all handmade for some of the releases. And we took, there was a website called Volcanic Tongue, which was the mailing list of a record store in Scotland, in Glasgow. And it was really cool, but a lot of the stuff that they were selling through this mail order was CDR releases. And there was a place in the States called Eclipse and Fusetron. These were all these mail order places that were selling tons of CDRs. And I have up there at the top is my CDR collection of stuff. I've backed them all up because CDRs are not as stable as a CD, as you probably know. But so we thought, let's do our own label and we'll just make 100 copies of these, and then they'll be sold out, and it'll sort of reflect the nature of the music too. We play something once and it's gone. And so there was this sort of like expiration date to the records. And so we just started making them all the time. We made a first album was a Bent Spoon Trio album, and then I made one with Jay Crocker, who I'd mentioned before. Then another Bent Spoon Trio album. The covers were all thematic too. There were this idea of them being the same but different. So we would find different ways, to fulfill that concept. Maps was the first one. It was all maps, but different maps on every cover. Then the second one, we put big pieces of paper that we dipped like a cup into different colors of paint, and sort of interlocked these circles of different colored paint on these big sheets of paper that we would then cut down into smaller sheets and adhere to these card stock covers that we had at the time. So stuff like that was really fun. It was all very homespun. And a lot of this was the three of us, the Bent Spoon Trio, doing this for a while. Then, around this time, we were also trying to play a lot. And we would play at different places. We played at a bookstore, a cafe called, it was called Prairie Ink, which was inside of McNally Robinson. And that was a really cool sort of like, I don't know if it was an independent store necessarily, but it wasn't Chapters. It was like, you know, the alternative to Chapters. It was this cool bookstore downtown that everybody loved going to. They had a coffee shop there, and we played there. But it was, as we started to get weirder and more exploratory in our playing, it's just not a great fit at certain places. There was a jazz club that we played at a couple times too, and actually ended up getting fired from one night because of just a misunderstanding about what was happening and who they had. It's a long story, but so we're like, we kind of need to make it so that when we have a show, we need to sort of make it clear about what's going to happen. And so we thought, well, we have Bug Incision Records, why don't we do Bug Incision concert series, and then we can sort of let people know that if it says Bug Incision Presents on it, it's going to be something kind of weird. It's going to be a little bit off the radar a little bit, and we wanted people to expect to not know what to expect. So that was our sort of original idea for it. And yeah, the first venue that we ended up there were two proto Bug Incision shows that were at a place called Cafe Koi in Calgary, and those weren't billed as Bug Incision shows, but that was sort of the first dip into the waters of doing that stuff. And then we started, and then the first show that ever said Bug Incision concert series on it, I used to make these programs. I would type them up on a typewriter and then photocopy them for the shows with little bios about all the musicians. And I was so ambitious back then. And the first time the Bug Incision Presents appeared on a program was actually the show that we got fired from. And that was in May of 2006. But for me, the first official start of the series was in July of 2006 at a place called The Soda, which was a really strange place on 12th Ave and 1st Street downtown. It was run by a guy named D, and we would communicate on MySpace. MySpace was big for us at the time of early Bug Incision. So yeah, we'd communicate on MySpace with D. Eventually we moved over to email. But it was a strange space. They didn't really have any particular style of programming that they did. There would be open mic nights. There would be industrial music nights. There would be EDM sort of dance parties. There would be rock shows. And it was really weirdly eclectic. And I think, I don't know, I think the place might have been sort of some sort of front for some activities, because whenever we'd have the door set up, people would come to the door and we say, oh, it's $5. And they say, oh, I just need to go see D for a second. And they'd sort of scurry up into the back of the venue. There was this room that he hung out in the back. And then a few minutes later, they'd scurry back out. And this was a pretty common occurrence at any night that we'd be there. So yeah, it was a mysterious spot, but they let us do whatever we wanted there, and never had anything to say about if it was dead or, no, they didn't care about anything. They didn't charge us a room fee, or it was great. It was awesome. And actually, a lot of those shows were filmed by a woman named Patty Dawkins, she was the wife of my boss at the record store that I worked at for many years, called Hot Wax. And so she did these amazing video recordings of all the early concert series at the Soda, that I eventually plan to do something with. I put them up on the internet or something. They're around somewhere. They need to be shown because they're really cool, and the video work is really cool too. So yeah, that was the Soda, and that was the first 6 months, second half of 2006, and then that's when Peter Moeller sort of came around and offered us some help getting into other venues. We still did stuff at the Soda. I remember we did a one-off for Dan Gaucher. Actually, he came to town, and Dan was interesting because he had left Calgary just as I was starting to get into the scene. And we're similar kinds of drummers, like jazz background, but also can play in rock bands and like to get weird. So I ended up sort of having some of his gigs that he left here when he left town. And so we were always sort of knew of each other. And he was, whenever he would come to town, to this day, we still try to do a good show for him and have a nice time. But yeah, he came back for that was probably in 2007, a one-off mostly for him to just meet Calgary musicians, and play with all the people that he didn't, that had sort of come up in his absence. So yeah, that was the very embryonic first few years. Yeah.
July 2006, first official show. So we really did just crest 20 years.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, that occurred to me too when I was having at the a media show. It was definitely that clicked at some point. I was like, okay, yeah, this is it.
That's awesome that you mentioned Dan, because he's one of my favorite people to hear in the city here in Vancouver. And you also even mentioned 2007 because there's a story I did earlier this year at Rhythm Changes where I went back and explored a show that I didn't catch because it was kind of before my time, but that I found interesting because Tortoise, whom you mentioned earlier, they played in Vancouver on a tour this year in March. And I talked to Dan and I talked to Stephen Lyons, and they were in the band Fond of Tigers. And I talked to them about when Fond of Tigers opened for Tortoise in 2007 at the Vancouver Jazz Festival at the Commodore here in Vancouver, and kind of heard about where they were at the time and about how they were digging that kind of music. It was fun.
Yeah, Stephen Lyons, that's cool. He was involved in that Space 1067. Did you ever go there?
I mean, I just missed it, I guess, but yeah, I would love to explore that even more because a lot of my friends have spent a lot of time there, and yeah, I can imagine that was, well, there was the Sugar Refinery even too, was another space before that in Vancouver, and then nearby 1067. Yeah, that was a hub for them.
Yeah, that weird space on Granville. I did a thing. There was I can't remember exactly who put it on, but there was something called the Vancouver Creative Music Institute, VCMI, and they would do these yearly sort of workshops where you could apply and come out, and they would there would be like a faculty of amazing musicians there. I remember there was the year that I was there, we had who was there? There was Mark Dresser, I believe, Nels Klein. There were some local musicians. There's a guy named John Korsrud who was there on the faculty. There was who else? There are definitely more people, but it was just the people from the States would come up. This guy Jacob Felix Hewley, who lives in San Francisco, he came up and I met him, and we were kind of collaborators for a while, and that was a very cool thing that happened over a couple of years. Evan Parker was there, I think, one year, not my year, but at one point, and I think there was like a mixer or something at 1067 to sort of like have everyone meet each other and do a bit of playing before the workshop started. So I think that's the first time I saw it. But then I came out there many times with Ben Spoon Trio would play there, and I used to get to travel around a lot more to play free improvised music shows, and that was definitely a hub for it. And yeah, Shane, and there was a piano player named Rachel Wadham who I played with quite a bit. We made a record together. It was really fun and great. But yeah, they were sort of staple. Oh, and Jonathan Wilkie, who I mentioned earlier, who runs Bug Incision with me. I saw them play there back in the day. That place was amazing. Totally weird. Enter through the alley, this weird building. I think there was maybe a porn studio somewhere in the building. Yeah, I don't know whether that was just a funny thing that people would say or whether it was true, but that was always something that was part of it. And yeah, the room was just this big, empty, weird room with couches and a couple pianos, and it was great. Yeah, so that was very inspiring to see that room too. I'm not sure if that would have been right around the time the Bug Incision was started too. So I kind of wanted to provide the Calgary version of that, something where people could go and you'd sort of know this is going to be one of those shows.
I think the first time I listened to a Bug Incision record without knowing the significance of it was a couple of years ago when, as part of writing about recent album releases in the community here in Vancouver, saxophone player Darren Williams, he put out a new album, and in writing about his new album, I went back and checked out one of his previous albums, which was Reed, which was on Bug Incision.
Yeah, yeah. Well, okay. So Darren is an important part of this story too, because he lived in Calgary for a while, and he's now in Kelowna. I haven't seen him in a while, but he's in Kelowna, still doing things out there. And he had a series called Nachhause, which was a concert series in Calgary that preceded Bug Incision. And he did amazing stuff. He had the Ab Bars trio. He had Queen Mab. He had lots of cool stuff that I'd missed too, because I only sort of cottoned onto it by the time that he was like getting ready to leave the city. He also did this big Ornette Coleman tribute band, the double quartet thing, which was at another venue called Bird and Stone, this tiny theater that was we actually did things at too, but not as Bug Incision ever, I don't think. But yeah, that was great. That's where I met a bunch of people too. There's an improviser from Toronto named Tom Golub, or sorry, Edmonton, from Tom Golub, and that's where I sort of reconnected with Wilkie too, actually. Oh no, that's actually the first time I met him, probably. Yeah, and then so Darren played these. He had these cool shows, and when he left, there was that void there that needed to be filled. And that's another reason why I was happy to be starting up a series and sort of taking that, the torch, continuing the tradition, and then we kept in touch over the years. Darren would come to Calgary occasionally for different stuff, and he approached me about the solo record, and of course the answer was yes. I always loved his playing. He also was the first improvised music show I ever saw, was put on by him at the Art Gallery of Calgary. It was a trio of him and Cody Oliver, who is he was a big part of Bug Incision for a long time as well. He was a guitarist and amazing photographer. A lot of the photos in that PDF that you were referring to, which was printed in a limited edition back in the day, he took a lot of those photos. And so it was them two and Ron DeYoung, who's from Edmonton, and he made a record with Derek Bailey and Eugene Chadbourne back in the day. He had a label. He was very active in Edmonton series, and then he sort of he kind of took a breather from the whole thing for a while, and has recently come back and is very active in improvising in Edmonton again. So that's awesome. But yeah, it was the three of them playing, and Darren his playing was terrifying. It was so loud. He comes from the Brotzman school, definitely. And he would always say, let's blow shit up. That would be the thing that he would say about playing music. So, but it was ready to go when he said that. But yeah, so he's an important figure in the whole beginnings of the series as well.
One of the other things that you've done is run a studio and be an engineer. Is this still something that you do often?
Oh yeah, that's all I do. Yeah, that was that's how I make a living basically these days. I mean, playing live music usually doesn't pay very well. So that's kind of what keeps me afloat. And I'd started doing it with, I mentioned the band Lab Coast earlier that I had for 10 years. I was always interested in recording machines, like back to when I was 10 years old, using the tape machine to make fake radio stations. And then eventually I kept doing it, and Lab Coast was kind of popular around Calgary, and people liked our recordings. It was the sort of early 2010s when the lo-fi thing was a big deal, and everyone's recordings were all fuzzy sounding. So I started to get people to ask me to record their bands, and I said yes for some reason. It just kept growing from there. I got a nice Tascam 388 tape machine that I worked on for a long time, and then I just kept getting more and more interested in trying to record better, and not just have everything sound like lo-fi tape recordings, which I still love and do occasionally, but it got to a certain point where there were bands asking me to record them just through the reputation of having worked with me, rather than the specific sonic thing of the tape machine. And so I started to get more interested in digital recording and being able to make cleaner, better recordings that had a lot more flexibility in what they could do. Because the thing about tape recording, of course, is that, you know, there's a lot of editing that can't be done on a tape machine, and with limited track counts too, you can only get so detailed with your productions. And certain bands would come through that it didn't quite fit for them to be using that methodology of recording. And so in 2018, the record store that I was working at was sold, and there was just a change in staff. So I no longer worked at a record store in May of 2018. I went on tour in Europe with Chad Van Galen, and I came back and I didn't have a job. So somehow that work, people asking me to do stuff, just took off at that point. And now I'm obsessed with it. And I do it all the time. If you check out my website, there's a huge list of recordings that I've worked on, anywhere from just recording or just mixing, to producing and playing all the instruments, and co-writing songs. Always doing that. That's a big part of what I do now. And Child Stone Studios is the name of the studio, and it's in my basement, and it's feeling good. Yeah, doing some great stuff.
Yeah. There's another thing I wanted to ask you about as we round the corner, which is you have quite the physical media collection around you in this room that you're in while we're speaking. I was wondering if you just wanted to share anything about how you go about listening to music and what your process and enjoyment is like, because these days there are many different answers, but I suspect you would have kind of an interesting answer or perspective at this point based on the magnitude of everything you've done and how much music you've lived and enjoyed.
Yeah, well, so like I said before, I worked in record stores for a long time. Ever since high school, end of high school, I got a job at HMV, the late great HMV. Worked there for a couple of years, and then while I was working there, I also got a job at a place called Hot Wax Records. And that was a used record and CD store. Eventually they went on to sell new vinyl when that whole craze started happening 15 years ago or so. And so access to cheap music has always been part of my world. At HMV, I lived at home. I was just going to school and living at home. So I would just get my paycheck every couple of weeks and walk out of the back room with a stack of CDs like this. And the other people who I worked with would always, there'd be sort of grumbling, people who had to pay rent and do other things, were just like looking at me walking around with this, like buying 20 CDs at a time. And I would just sit there in the store with All Music Guide website open on one tab, and then on the other tab was the store's like catalog of everything that we could order. And I would just be going back and forth and saying, oh, this Derek Bailey album, okay, yep, I'll grab that. And there were some really cool reissue labels back then. There was one called the Unheard Music Series, which was a sub label of Atavistic Records, which was a Chicago-based label. And John Corbett, the great writer and curator John Corbett, curated that label, and put out tons of weird FMP stuff and stuff that was on SAJ, this Sven-Åke Johansson's label, and all sorts of obscure stuff that was like, even back then, was really expensive to try and find in stores or on eBay. This is pre Discogs too. But yeah, so I always had access to cheap music, whether it was a staff discount or just people would just dump stuff at the store sometimes. But so yeah, I just amassed a huge collection of stuff. I prefer CDs. CDs are my favorite format, but I don't really care what format it's on. Vinyl is great. I have a ton of vinyl. What you're seeing behind you is only a little part of it too. There's that's just the jazz and improv CDs. And over here is some more avant-garde music that is maybe more unclassifiable. And then over there, there's stuff that I haven't listened to yet. Anyway, there's a lot of stuff, and then all the pop and rock is downstairs in our spare room, and yeah. So I obviously I don't listen to all of it all the time, and some of it I know that I'll never listen to again. That's just sort of something I came to terms with a while back. But these days, mostly what I do is if I'm working in here and doing administrative stuff, I got piles of things to listen to and check out that are sort of in the to listen to pile. And then the other thing I've been doing is these deep dives of specific artists. So I'll get all the CDs by David Bowie or The Cure or The Smiths. These are all sort of bands that I've not properly done my homework on over the years. So I'll get a couple books about them, and I'll get all the discs or vinyl or whatever it is, and yeah, just sort of marinate in a certain artist for as long as it takes me to read all the books I have about them while I'm listening. So that's been a fun thing that I've done over the last couple of years. I do it less in the summer because it's nice to get out and about. The time that I would do that during the day is often a time where I'll go for a walk and then end up usually listening to podcasts or something like that. But yeah, that's been something that's been really fun. And yeah, I've never really been a streaming music guy. I have a subscription to a service that mostly is there for reference if I'm working with artists who are referring to things that I've never heard before. So just popping it on, or traveling is good for that too. But yeah, tapes, vinyls, CDs, all good. Love it all. CDRs, of course, the CDRs. But yeah, I'm pretty addicted to it still. And I don't see any end in sight. I stopped getting rid of things too. I don't. That was when I started to rebuy things. That was when I was like, okay, I don't think I should be selling this stuff, because when I was younger, I would think that I was done with something, and I can get rid of this, and then who knows, 15 years later maybe you want to hear that Interpol CD again that you foolishly sold for $1 10 years ago. So yeah, don't get rid of anything anymore, and that's just how it is. One of my favorite things is, if I ever get to go to Los Angeles, is to go to Amoeba Records. I don't know if you've ever had a chance to go there. It's unbelievable, the most insane record store, just so much stuff. New and used, all formats. It's when I go there, it's I gotta set aside some cash to do some damage.
That's so great. That's so fun to hear you describe it, and it's a great way to be. Is there anything else that we haven't mentioned or talked about as we've gone through the timeline here that you wanted to shout out or point towards before we wrapped?
I don't know. We've gone pretty deep on a lot of stuff. Yeah, it's just that we're continuing on with no breaks, no anything like that. There's a show in a few weeks, and then we've got an ad hoc one in September. Yap Blanc is going to be here in October, which is very exciting. And yeah, we'll probably try to circle back. We had a sort of a grand plan to do the 20th anniversary celebrations we wanted to make a box set of music recorded at the series. We wanted to do a book, like a properly printed book. The 10-year book was more of like a homemade zine thing. And then we wanted to get we wanted to work in 2020. We did get a small grant to organize our archives. On the website, you can see there's a huge spreadsheet of every single show that's happened up to March of 2020, and it's got the names of all the performers and what they played, and then it also lists what type of documentation from the show that we have, and there's a ton of it. It's huge. And when we did that project, I'd sort of thought that people would want to have access to it more, but I think like less than 5 people have actually gone on the spreadsheet and say, hey, can I get that recording from that show? Which is kind of funny to me. But so we thought that we would try to use a bunch of this stuff from the archive, and that was our plan this year. But we will maybe shoot for 25 years for that and be a little bit more organized about getting that together. The thing about the series too is that it's completely shoestring DIY operation. There's no money involved with it. Like, no, I've never made any money from it really to speak of, and it's all the money for the shows is from the door, and it goes straight to the artists. And so it's hard to keep up with running it sometimes, which is just how it is. But it would be great. Eventually, we'd like to sort of. I have mixed feelings about this because I do like how sort of there's like a sort of almost punkish ethos to the way we do things without any sort of support. But it would also be nice to be able to get paid one day a week to work on the label, and it would be nice, or the all of it really. But and be able to have a set amount of money to pay people, especially people who are coming through from out of town. We tend to try to funnel as much of the proceeds from a show like that to the traveling artist, because nobody's getting rich off this stuff, and it's like gas isn't getting any cheaper either. So that's something that we might want to look into in the future. But the vibe is good at the moment, and the series ultimately is better than it's ever been currently. The venue has a lot to do with that, but also people are more curious about stuff than they used to be 20 years ago. There's less lines between different genres and audiences and stuff. Things seem a lot more open. Younger people seem to be more into it. And yeah, it's one of those things where sometimes it feels like a lot of work, and I sort of almost dread having to do it. But once I'm there at the show, things are cooking, people are having a good time. I'm always like, oh, this is the best. So yeah, I can't complain too much. And yeah, and for anyone listening that's not from here or is not from, reach out, especially traveling artists, put it on your itinerary as a place to come by. We'll make sure you have a good time and all that stuff. So yeah, reaching out there's a very open door policy with getting involved, whether it's from an audience perspective or different people who want to play. So it's get in touch.
That plus your observations on the scene around you feeling good right now is such a lovely note to end on. It's been so much fun to hear and learn from you about everything you've been up to. So Chris, thanks for talking to me today. I appreciate it.
Thanks so much for having me. It was a treat.